Have you ever felt like you were just thrown into the leadership world without a guidebook? I certainly was. I recently got to talk about my career journey with David Driver on his podcast, Career Conversations. And it was such a good conversation that I wanted to share it with you. I've decided to split it into two parts. This first segment is going to dive into the starting of my career journey. You'll hear about how I ran away from home a couple times when I was a teenager and some of the challenges that I had when I moved into leadership without the training or support to get there. At least not the formal training that would have been very helpful. You're going to hear some of the pivotal moments in my career, how coaching shaped me. And I think if you've ever felt overwhelmed and overloaded in your career journey, in your leadership experience, you're going to find this episode insightful, perhaps, but also you're going to feel like you're seen too and know that what we're going through, a lot of us are going through, and it's hard. So I want to really remind you that you're not alone. We're going to dive in and you're going to hear the first half of the story. I'll have a quick conversation with you at the end. And then next episode, you'll get to hear the rest.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the MACD Career Conversations podcast, where we talk to career people about their careers. My name is David Driver, and today we have Kathy Archer. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely excited to be here.
Okay, Kathy, so just for all of our audience members, just if they may not be familiar with you, could you just give a quick introduction of who you are and what you're currently doing?
I am a leadership development coach, and I help women leaders primarily in the nonprofit sector uh, enjoy impactful leadership. I think we've gone through a lot of changes, and Dave and I were just talking about the transition into leadership, and it can be tough. So I teach, coach, and mentor
Mm.
in the nonprofit sector. Although, like I said, I do stuff outside the nonprofit sector, but really to help leaders learn how to lead from within. We've moved into leadership positions often without the training and support to navigate leadership. We're good at frontline, but then we move into leadership. Now what? And we're not getting the training.
Yeah,
We're like thrown in. So that's where I come in and support leaders in doing that.
awesome. And how long have you been doing that for?
Oh, I have been coaching for about 14 years now.
Wow.
And so I have written one book. My second one will be out in March of next year. I have my own podcast, Surviving to Thriving podcast, and I have a membership where I provide tons of resources to help leaders. So all of that has grown and ebbed and flowed over the years. I do training in organizations, all virtual. I live in Northern Alberta, and by Northern Alberta, I do not mean Edmonton. I live 6 hours north of Edmonton, so I live in the
Oh,
Peace Country. Yeah. So it's a bit of a drive. I used to do the speaking and conference scene, but it's a bit of a drive. So all of my work is virtual now.
awesome. So yeah, before we get into all of that, because that sounds like you're very, very busy these days. A
Aha.
lot of events going on. Yeah, let's start with getting to know you a little bit more. So yeah, you mentioned you're from Alberta. Were you born in Alberta?
I was born and raised in Barron's area or Nobleford, which is about 30 minutes from Lethbridge. So I
Okay.
was born and raised in Southern Alberta, grew up on a farm. I was a 4-H girl. I was on student council. You
Okay.
know, I had that kind of background experience back then.
Awesome. And growing up, did you ever have any career aspirations? Did you think you'd be on a farm forever, or if you had your own farm growing up, or did you ever have any other ideas?
Yeah, well, I was always a reader,
Okay.
very much always into reading. So it makes sense that I would be writing books now. And playing, I had 3 siblings growing up, and I was often playing teacher out. You know, we had this old bunkhouse that when we kind of dug in, they had left old books and I don't know, like little notepads and stuff. And yeah, we would play teacher in school. And so I was definitely teaching back then.
Yeah.
And at some point I really wanted to move into social work. And so that was kind of when I was in junior high, high school, that was kind of the route I had planned on going.
Yeah. Where did that idea come from? Was that just sort of like a synthesis of all like your interests and your ideas, or did someone kind of like introduce that idea to you? Or you saw something on television, or
Yeah, I honestly don't know the moment, but okay, so I paint the picture. I'm a 4-H girl. I am, on student council, and then I met this guy.
uh-oh.
And this guy did not meet up to my parents' expectations.
Okay.
And between the summer of grade 11 and 12, I ran away from home.
Oh my. Okay.
Run away from home, meaning like middle of the night, drive down or walk down the gravel road. I did a really good Toastmaster speech on this. Like, it was pitch black that night. And went into, like, the 3 kilometers into town to go meet my boyfriend. And, my parents came knocking at the door the next morning, and I went home because I had a, exchange to Quebec through 4-H. So, like, if you wanna do the exchange, you gotta come home and, like, follow the rules kinda thing,
Yeah.
right? So I come home, follow the rules, did the exchange. I was still, like, in love with this guy. So I ran away a second time, and then I moved in with him. So I moved in with him between the summer of grade 11 and 12.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, so the following year, I turned 18 in May. I graduated in June with honors.
Yeah. Good job.
We got married in July, and I started college in September.
Wow.
How's that?
That's quick.
And
Efficient.
we just celebrated our 36th anniversary.
I
So,
was
like, it's crazy.
I was gonna say this is the best story ever if you're still with this guy. And then okay, so that's great.
We have 4
Congratulations.
kids 4 kids and 5 granddaughters right now. So, yeah, we've done all right.
You knew right away. There was something there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But at that time, I mean, like I say, that was not the who I was. And so I did go to some counseling and I did get some supports and stuff. And I think that started kind of that I want to help people
Mhm.
through this. Like, what's going on and why are we stuck and why won't anybody believe me or listen to me or think that I'm doing something wrong, right? And so, of course, when you move in with your boyfriend at that age and he doesn't make very much, university wasn't an option.
Yeah.
So college was the cheaper route, and I had got, like I said, I got good marks, so I got some financial support to help with that.
Mhm.
Uh, and I went into and took my child and youth care diploma.
Okay.
So, it was either rehab or ECS or, working with at-risk youth. And so I picked the at-risk youth, right? So when I graduated 2 years later, there was all of us that had graduated and no jobs. Like, we're vying for 1 or 2
Mhm.
jobs because the market was saturated with grads. And so, go north, they say. So north we went. So you want me to keep going on this story? Because
Sure,
like
yeah.
I
Not Edmonton. How far north did you go?
well, I looked at Grand Prairie thinking Grand Prairie would be a big center, right?
Yeah.
And so I seen a job, and when I ended up doing the interview on the phone, and it was for this little town of Grimshaw, and it was a group home, and I'm like, "I don't know, it looks like close to Grand Prairie, right?" Well, it's 2 hours from Grand Prairie.
Okay.
So it's not quite Grand Prairie. They flew me up, and at the time when I remember flying in, and I'm, like, 19 still, like, I'm pretty young, right? We're flying in, and it's, like, bush. I'm like, "Where the hell am I going? Like, what am I doing?" And so, yeah, they, hired me. We moved up here, another little sidebar, the car broke on the way up, so we had no car for the first 6 months. Like, it was just, that kind of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Um, and so I worked at the group home, and then financial like, the government swayed and ebbed and flowed, and it lost its funding.
Oh, okay.
So I worked at the group home for a couple years. When I started at the group home, I was the only one with formal education. Most of the other workers did not even have grade 12. And
Wow.
so it was a weird here I'm like 19, doing, restraints when I'm pregnant and running down back alleys chasing AWOL kids that are like just a year younger than me, some of them. So it was a very weird place to be. But yeah, so much I learned and grew from that experience. From there, when the group home closed, I started at the school and did work with some people with disabilities and
Okay.
some other work with another organization. So, adults and children both with disabilities. And this is all, like I said, I had 4 kids. So, there's some mat leaves in the middle here and
Sure,
all
yeah,
that.
a couple breaks here and there.
Yeah. Back then, we didn't get a year though.
Yeah.
And then I started in an organization doing family support work, and I ended up staying in that organization for almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I started, doing home visitation, teaching parenting skills, supervising visits of, parents with kids that had been apprehended,
Mhm.
and then moved into sort of leadership positions and, up the ranks.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's where I kind of, ended the paid, in the role career.
Yeah. So I guess 2 questions I have from that great story.
Yeah.
People like to take their time with these things mostly, I'll think about having children, I'll think about getting married, I'll think about moving for my job. It's just like it seems like, "Oh, snap
I
of the
bet.
fingers, here I am. Here I go." But the first question I had was, it seems like social work to me is one of those classic areas where I think a lot of people, they gravitate towards it because they do feel like that innate interest in it, but
Yeah.
being interested in that field and dealing with the realities of that position is probably the starkest little difference I think a lot of people kinda get into. They're like, "I love this field, but it's so hard to perform as a job." So I don't know if you ever experienced those types of things throughout the years there, or that was shocking to you, or was that something that you kind of climatized to really well?
I think I acclimatized to it in a bad way, which is
Okay.
probably partly why I moved on. And when I realized that, is some of those things that I seen or heard were just horrific. Uh,
Mhm.
the abuse, kids going back home when you knew it wasn't a great place to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I would do supervised visits. I remember doing a supervised visit once, and we were in this portable with the mom and the kids. And dad, who's not supposed to have any contact, is like circling the building, right? And small towns, visits over, the foster parents come and pick up the kids. I'm going home 5 blocks. Like, he's gonna follow me, right? Like,
Yeah.
things like that. Visits where, there was a horrible situation where the dad had held a gun to the kid's head,
Wow.
and, like, here I'm supervising a visit between this dad and this kid, and I'm like, "How fair? Like, this isn't right."
And you
You
still,
know?
those are things you remember to this
Oh,
day, right? There's still, maybe you could
oh,
probably
yeah.
tell a whole bunch of stuff that's probably carried with you,
Tons of
right? So
stories. And
mhm.
the system, and we all know this with every system, is broken. And you would be fighting the system, and now I look at the issue of homelessness, and
Yeah.
people are like, well, just get rid of the tent cities. That's not the solution. um you know
Why didn't
and
I
back
think of that? That sounds,
Yeah, exactly. Let's just snap our fingers and they're gone. But we're talking about such mixed issues. And
Mhm.
back in the day when we first started, we would literally sit down at the boardroom table, and you would have addictions there, and you would have mental health there, and you'd have child protection there, and we would all talk about one family. And then this thing called privacy came in, and that kind of stopped. And we
Mhm.
really started to struggle with this disjointedness and, disconnection. And I think some of that has improved again once we got through the whole privacy thing. But, still you've got somebody who's, the parent has addictions or mental health issues or whatever. And we're not dealing with that. We're just talking about parenting.
Yeah.
Well, why is parenting an issue, right?
Yeah. You could probably spend so many time on just a single case because, yeah, some of them just, like, go and they're so deep in terms of the
Yes.
issues and the nuance and stuff, right? So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and that's what got me into, so at one point in my career, we were, a decent sized group. And we knew that what we were doing wasn't working so well with our families, and the fetal alcohol syndrome work was starting to grow. And so we jumped into that world, and I spent a ton of time. I'm a learner, so I went to conferences and read books, and did lots of training. And we ended up getting, because we knew that a lot of our parents that we were working with were struggling with that, and if we could support the parents, we could then help with parenting in a little bit different way.
Yeah.
And so we ended up getting one of the first FASD contracts in the province. And we like doubled in size. We picked up the whole north quarter of Alberta.
Wow.
And so I'm going to high level in Grand Prairie, and my husband's with me, and we're setting up desks and computers and, trying to like get this going. And as a leader, I was stretched, like stretched
Mhm.
way too much. And my integrity started to slip, and that's what showed up on performance appraisals. Staff were like, "You're not there for us. You're cutting us," and I was like dying trying to
Yeah.
keep up with this magnitude of work.
Yeah.
And that's when I had staff file a grievance against me. And that's when I got introduced to coaching. My boss was like throwing up his hands. He's like, I don't know how to sort through this mess, right? And he knew that I was a good leader. And I mean, it was
Yeah.
just past, right?
Yeah.
I had worked through things already, and so yeah, I was introduced to coaching, fell in love with coaching. Coaching transformed me, really transformed our team again, pulled myself back in as a leader, developed myself, and really kind of reined that in. And then, yeah, I wanted to do the leadership training. And so, it wasn't cheap. And I asked my boss, and he said, no, I wasn't going to fund it. Um, but there was a bursary at the time through the Children's Services provincially, and so I applied for the bursary and got that bursary, and so that was this kind of start of my coaching career,
Yeah.
and then, yeah,
Awesome.
I'll let you ask questions from
Sure.
that.
Well, my second one, because I think you probably encounter this a lot too with maybe clients you have, or maybe people have asked you, but like with your own personal experience, did you ever have any intuition to be a leader? Is that something that you set out wanting to be, or did it just come through happenstance or through some opportunities? Because you do hear a lot of people where they kind of just fell into it, or like you said at the top, where just by nature of just being promoted sometimes means
Yeah.
you're now in charge of other people. So, I don't know if people naturally set out to be leaders. I'm sure some people do, and some people just fall into it. How would you describe sort of your going about it? Did you ever have an inkling of wanting to like run a team, be a leader, be a manager, or was it just something that you just kind of fell into and just rolled with it, sort of thing?
I mean, I was always a leader in high school, like, say, junior high, like, I showed up in those roles. I don't think I consciously chose, like, leader, but
Hmm.
I wanted to be impactful. I wanted to, have my say. I wanted to support people, so I think that was always there. When I moved into leadership in my work world, again, I don't think I kind of said, "Hey, I want to be a leader." I think it just sort of naturally I had those natural talents per
Sure. Yeah.
se, and I just kind of I fell into it. Um, but I was once, like I say, I'm a learner, so right away I was taking local courses from the further ed councils and the I in my upcoming book, I talk about 2 leadership lows. So the second leadership low was when the staff, filed a grievance against me. The first one was many years earlier. Shortly after I got into my leadership position, the staff brought the union in and, like, it was nasty for a
Wow.
while.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kinda bad. And at that point, it was them against us, and us, I was, like, new to the role, like, "I mean, what are you guys?" Like, Um, and so when it was really bad at my worst, I planned a Christmas party, and one person showed up, and so it was like,
Nice.
oh, yeah. So I went home that year on my Christmas break, and, like, I didn't know if I wanted to come back. I was like, "It's time for different work," right?
Yeah.
Ended up at the doctor on antidepressants, like, "Okay, this is not good."
Yeah.
And the way I dug myself out of that was going back to school. That's when I started my degree in leadership, and it took me 8 years to get my degree in leadership because, like I said, I have 4 kids, my husband was working oil field.
Yeah. There's other things going on. Yeah.
Yeah, life was happening. Taekwondo, like, dance class.
Yeah.
Um, but that once I started diving into the leadership world, then I knew this is where I belong,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's partly why when I got introduced to coaching, I knew, like I say, the system is broken and I was struggling to make a difference in the system. But if
Hmm.
I could support leaders,
Yeah.
then perhaps I would have more weight, working in on individual leaders than the system as a whole. And that's kind of where my brain is now.
Yeah. So yeah, thinking about your current practice, could you describe a little bit about sort of like your normal clientele? So do you normally see people who are getting into leadership for the first time, or do you normally see people who have done it for a little while and they're just looking for some, tips or some extra practice? And to that also, like what are some of the major topics that you discuss with them, or what are some of the major things people are looking to kind of develop as a leader?
Yeah. So let me just start by saying I do what I like I said at the top of the podcast. I teach, coach, and mentor women leaders in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah.
But I also do some other work outside of the nonprofit sector. And so I'm lucky enough to work with an organization named Ezra. So they coach globally,
Okay.
big leaders. So I have coached leaders from RBC, AstraZeneca, what's the place that builds furniture?
Leon's. Yeah, like
No,
IKEA.
no, IKEA, like just places like that. So So the experience that I have is everything from your frontline, new to leadership, maybe only doing leadership, 20% of their week in a group home doing, personal care to a senior leader of a big organization. So it runs the gamut. And interestingly enough, the topics are pretty much all the same. Uh,
Okay.
it's how do I balance all of this?
Yeah.
Right? There's just too much to do. How do I prioritize so that work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
You advance in your career and then all of a sudden, your family takes the back burner.
Mhm.
Um, so a big part is that just the basics of supervision, like how do I talk to people? How do I deal with conflict? How do I do one-to-one meetings? How do I do a performance appraisal?
Yeah.
And it's not here's the form. That's the problem. The organization says, here's the form, do somebody's performance appraisal. Okay,
Yeah.
but how do I do it?
Yeah.
Right? How do I bring up those touchy subjects? How do I address this? How do I grow them to reach their full potential?
Yeah.
So there's that. Uh, there is just the inner growth, and I spend a lot of time on the inner growth of a leader. Who you are is how you lead.
Mhm.
It's not that I can run a meeting. Everybody can run a meeting, but how do you run that meeting?
Yeah.
Right? That's the leadership, and that starts by looking at yourself. It's that inner growth journey. And so people have to start looking for me, when it hit me, like I say, my performance appraisal staff said, "Kathy's out of integrity." I'm like, "What does that even mean?"
You did
Right?
bone dry, are you? Just
Yeah. So I start, looking up the definition of integrity. What does integrity mean, right?
yeah.
And it's like, you walk your talk. So if I say work-life balance is important to our team, but I'm there at 9 o'clock at night and on Sunday morning, I'm not walking my talk.
Mhm.
I say to the team, "Open door policy, I'm here when you need me," but I'm not.
Mhm.
Right? Or you can tell me if I'm not measuring up or if you have a question, and then they're like, "Well, I ain't talking to her, like, she's gonna blow up if you go near her." So, of course, I was out of integrity. So I had to step back and look at what are my values, my ethics, my morals? What do I believe in? What hills am I gonna die on?
Yeah.
And then how do I walk that talk when somebody else is pushing back?
Yeah. That's a really good point. I think is my first big brain picking question. I'm sure you might have gotten this a few times throughout your career. Because we do hear the phrase like born leader, natural born leader. You kind of describe yourself in that way, saying like, I liked to do this. I like to kind of be in
Yeah.
these areas. I don't know if you kind of agree, but just in the general thinking of the subject, I think most people can be leaders to what you just said, because leading is a very broad topic where people lead in different ways, like you're saying. But I think the overarching question I have for you is that do you feel like that natural born leader, that born leader sort of like phrasing, is that really a big part of becoming a good leader, is having those sort of that natural tendencies? Or can someone really find their own style or even be taught or trained to be a good leader? Is it like a balance of both? But yeah, just want to get your opinion on that, because that seems to be, I don't know if it's a misconception, but I think a lot of people kind of feel like they have it or they don't.
Yeah.
They can be a good leader or they can't. And I don't know if you had a comment on that or.
Anyone can learn to be a leader,
Mhm.
100%. Leadership at its fundamental basics is influencing other people. So if you're in a crowd, there's a famous story, and I don't even remember who it is or where it is, but the sports team finishes the game, they win, and then later the guys are cleaning up the garbage in the stands, right? That nobody said you're a leader, you're a soccer player or whatever, but they're demonstrating leadership by doing that, right? When you're in a meeting and your leader is at the front of the room and they're leading, you can be sitting there like this and just on your phone, tuning out a few sarcastic comments under your breath, or you can be saying, "How can I help?"
Yeah.
Right? And so that's leadership, is that influence. All right. You got a little bit of my story. Take a moment to reflect on that. Are there similarities to yours? Did you learn any lessons? What moments have shaped you? How have they shaped how you've become a leader? And maybe where do you want to go? Because in the next part, I'm going to share how my leadership journey transformed and how I've used that transformation through the coaching I got to now support you in your development and growth. Stay tuned.